distinguished guests, esteemed speakers, industry leaders, partners, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to you today to the Rising Asia and BCCI second edition of its annual summit. Today, under this theme, India's turn, seizing opportunities amidst the geopolitical challenges, we gather at a pivotal moment for our nation and the region. In a world navigating complex geopolitical shifts, supply chain realignments, and emerging economic dynamics, India stands poised to lead. This summit is a platform to explore how we can turn challenges into catalysts for growth, innovation, and collaboration. Before we dive into this exciting day of insights and deliberations and discussions, a quick disclaimer and a note. As all of you are aware, there have been ongoing disruptions in airline operations across India in recent days, affecting travel plans nationwide. Due to these unforeseen challenges, some of our distinguished speakers have been unable to join us today in person and will be participating virtually. We are truly grateful for their commitment and flexibility in ensuring their valuable contributions reach us seamlessly. We are extremely honored to have an exceptional lineup of speakers who will share their perspectives today with us. Before I start the proceedings, a note of thanks to all our partners, without whose support this occasion wouldn't have been made possible. A special thanks to our diamond partner Hindustan Unilever Limited, our gold partners Advent Education, Bandhan Bank, Caring Minds International, Castrol, Haldia Petrochemicals Limited, Linde India Limited, our bronze partners Air Water India, Bamalori, and IEM, UEM. We have our industry support partners from Berger Paints, Century Ply, Day & Bose, and Calcutta Tea Traders Association. And we also have our chief patron, GIS Group, with us. Thank you so much. And thank you for all of you being here today, early winter morning. So without further ado, let us begin. I would like to call upon the inaugural session speakers in the dais. One of them is with us virtually, so I would call his name at the last. First, may I kindly call upon our President, Mr. Abhijit Roy, Managing Director and CEO of Berger Paints India Limited, to kindly take his seat in the dais. Then I request Mr. Aniruddha Lahiri, who is our former President of BCCI and President of Rising Asia Foundation, and also the convener of the summit. We have Dr. Harish Mehta, Founder Chairman, Rising Asia Foundation, Trust and Editor-in-Chief, Rising Asia Journal, if you could kindly come up. We have Ms. Meera Shankar, former Ambassador of India to United States. Ma'am, if you could kindly take your seat. And also we have virtually joining us, so if the screen can be visible, made visible, Dr. Sanjay Baru, political commentator and ex-chief editor, The Financial Express. He's joining us virtually. Good morning, sir. I hope you can hear and see us.
Yes, indeed. I'm sorry
you.
I'm not there, but I can hear you and see you.
Thank you so much. So, there you go. Let us begin. May I now invite Mr. Abhijit Roy, President BCCI, to deliver the welcome address, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry, it's my privilege to welcome you all to the second edition of the BCCI Rising Asia Summit 2025. This year's theme, India's turn, seizing opportunities amidst global geopolitical challenges, could not be more timely. The world is navigating uncertainty, realignments, and rapid shifts in economic and strategic priorities. And yet, within this complexity lies a remarkable moment for India, a moment to lead, to innovate, and to shape the emerging global order. The summit was actually conceived precisely to spark such conversations, to bring together thinkers, policymakers, industry leaders, and partners who believe in India's potential and are committed to translating that potential into progress. Today in 2025, a pivotal midpoint towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we confront a world redefined by geopolitical flux, escalating US China rivalries, protectionist tariffs, reshaping global trade alliances, and supply chain disruptions from conflicts in Ukraine to the Middle East. Yet, India's resilience shines through. Our economy is likely to grow in excess of 7% this year. In fact, in quarter two, we had a stellar growth of 8.2% plus, outpacing global majors and positioning us as the fastest growing large economy, with ambitions to hit 8% annually to become a developed nation by 2047. Amid China plus one shifts, we stand to capture manufacturing investments, boosting our sector's GDP share from 12% today to potentially 20% by 2032 through bold reforms. And with foreign exchange reserves bolstering our rupee trade initiatives, we are asserting economic sovereignty in a fragmented world. I extend my heartfelt thanks to our esteemed speakers, partners, and delegates for joining us today. Your presence enriches this platform and strengthens our collective endeavor. We look forward to insightful discussions, bold ideas, and collaborative pathways that can help India navigate challenges and harness the opportunities before us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I now call upon Mr. Aniruddha Lahiri, former President BCCI, current President of Rising Asia Foundation and the convener of the summit, to set the context for the proceedings today.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope all of you are comfortable and ready to participate in this in today's discussions. We all know, ladies and gentlemen, that the contemporary world is marked by heightened geopolitical tensions. Tensions of all kinds, supply chain disruptions, regional conflicts, for example, Russia, Ukraine, the Middle East instability which continues, and increasing rivalry between major powers, particularly the US and China, the two big successful nations, and most recently, that between China and Japan over the issue of Taiwan. These shifts, as you have all realized, are shaping the global trade, security, actually reshaping global trade, security architecture, and technological cooperation between the nations. At the same time, climate change, energy insecurity, and reconfiguration of global institutions further add to this volatility. And I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that the US's humongous debt will soon add to the complexity. At least the methods which are proposed to be employed to resolve this issue, which is going to shake the world. My task today, ladies and gentlemen, is to share with you the context for today's discussions, which is to share with you and ideas and explore how India can leverage the current geopolitical turbulence. Now, what are we seeking? Well, what are we, this leveraging, our ability to leverage the current turbulence, political turbulence, why? First, it is to strengthen our global economic and political position in the world, which is already happening to some extent. Second is to attract strategic investments, and I would say the low-hanging fruit here is going to come out of the supply chain realignments. We must assert leadership in multilateral platforms and build resilience through self-reliance and diversified partnerships, which is also, we are seeing the beginnings of it now. Now, the challenge therefore is to be able to not just look at these, look at the problems that we are going through, but actually to explore how we can turn this adversity or adverse condition into opportunities. That is, to explore the options is what we are going to discuss today. Now, the key opportunities for India, as I mentioned earlier, is going to come through realignment of supply chains, China plus one strategy. We have now an opportunity to seek leadership in the global south. Energy security and green transition are another two possibilities that India can leverage. Digital leadership and tech diplomacy, by which I mean the modern diplomatic practice focused on managing international relations centered around technology. And of course, defense and strategic autonomy, which is what to do and when to do. Now, all this doesn't come easily, and therefore there are many challenges that have to be addressed. Now, while we do this during our discussions today, let me just point out some of the, I would say, the key challenges. I think the first important thing is balancing relations with conflicting global actors. Example, between US and Russia, China and the West of the world. Strengthening the institutional capacity and internal cohesion to match international expectations from us. In ensuring domestic reforms keep pace with global expectations, that is logistics, judiciary, skill development, and so on and so forth. And allocation of funds, which is, I think, another very important area, which is allocation of funds for research, which includes agriculture, technology, which is AI mainly, and pharmaceuticals. Now, ladies and gentlemen, while I expect a comprehensive set of recommendations to emerge from our discussions over the day, I would like to mention a few broad strategic points, which are: expand regional influence by deepening ties with ASEAN, Africa, and Latin America. Institutionalize India-led multilateralism with forums like Voice of Global South Summit. Accelerate infrastructure and logistics to become a global manufacturing hub. But when I say a global manufacturing hub, I'm talking about high technology manufacturing hub. And then we must invest in strategic technologies, such as in manufacturing semiconductors, making use of them, AI, defense technology, and how? Well, via public-private partnerships and skill development, education, STEM in particular. Yeah. And lastly, maintain strategic balance through multipolar diplomacy and calibrated engagement with all major powers. So now to conclude, I personally feel that India's moment on the world stage has arrived. I'm sure there will be disagreements, but that is something that we leave for the day, for the rest of the day. And this is not by default. This moment has arrived. That's not by default, but by deliberate diplomatic, economic, and strategic effort. The current political instability, while complex, offers India an historic opportunity, not which comes very often, to reshape its role as a rule shaper rather than a rule taker. Through pragmatic policies, visionary leadership, and robust partnerships, India can transform the current global challenges into a pathway for sustainable, secure, and inclusive growth. That, ladies and gentlemen, I think is a summary of what we should expect from the summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. May I now request Dr. Harish Mehta, Founder Chairman of Rising Asia Foundation Trust and Editor-in-Chief of the Rising Asia Journal, to say a few words on the Rising Asia Foundation.
Thank you, Sambit. Thank you for that. I'm delighted to see such a wonderfully large turnout. Many of you, I must thank for having flown the unfriendly skies. To take a word out of Pan Am, fly the friendly skies. But I can assure you it's a temporary unfriendliness, and the airlines will be back to their own coffee, tea, or me in no time. I'm known for injecting a little bit of humor in to dampen things a little bit. I'm just kidding. I'm supposed to be actually talking a little bit about Rising Asia Foundation. So the Rising Asia Foundation was founded about little more than 5 years ago during the height of the COVID. And when I returned from teaching in Canada with my partner, Professor Julie Mehta, we decided to leverage some of our international connections with scholars abroad in Canada, United States, Singapore, where I'd worked for many years, Vietnam, and Malaysia. So these are some of the countries where our editorial board of the Rising Asia Journal is drawn from. But before I come to that, I must say that so the Rising Asia Foundation is a trust which was founded 5 years ago. And I'll just come to the purposes of that. And the present summit is organized, as we have heard, is under the initiative of the Rising Asia's president, Mr. Aniruddha Lahiri, in collaboration with the BCC and I. Now, the Rising Asia, the main brand is the Rising Asia Foundation, and it has sub-products, sub-brands, of which I'll tell you what the others are. So one of them is the Rising Asia Journal, which is this. This is the summer issue of 2025, and it consists of 613 pages. We only come out 3 times a year, so it's quite a humongous task to edit it. So that's the Rising Asia Journal. The journal is read in between 80 to 100 countries, which is certified by Google Analytics. It's mainly an online journal, but we also publish the printed copy for sales on Amazon. The other very important sub-brand is the Rising Asia Literary Circle, which is anchored by Professor Julie Mehta, who's here. And they hold about 12 programs a year. And these are book launches, author discussions, and all to do with literature, poetry. So that's also looking at that. The other sub-brand we have is something called the Distinguished Annual Lectures, often of foreign policy, so they're called Distinguished Annual Foreign Policy Lecture. We've had, the first one was, the lecturer was Indonesian Ambassador Dino Pati Jalal. He was followed by, the following year, by Cambodian Senior Minister Ieng Muli. The next year we had the Singapore Ambassador at Large Tommy Koh. And this year we've just had it last month with a distinguished professor of Chinese studies, Professor Roland Boer from Renmin University of China in Beijing. Some of our conferences under the Rising Asia Literary Journal have resulted in the publication of books, scholarly books edited and published through Routledge London and New York. One of them is a book on the works of the Canadian Booker Prize winner Michael Ondaatje. Our forthcoming plans are that we are going to be collaborating with the Advanced Study Institute of Asia, focused on jointly doing conferences of a geopolitical and diplomatic, historical, international relations nature. So these will be 3 programs we'll do every year, in addition to the 12 that Julie's Literary Circle does, and the Distinguished Annual Lecture. So we keep busy. So now the Rising Asia Journal is probably the only journal of its kind with its mix, which is the northeast of India, Southeast Asia, and East Asia, all between covers. And we publish leading writers, scholars, international relations experts. The Rising Asia Foundation is led by its president, Mr. Lahiri, who works with an international and a local board of advisors. And they set policy for us to work with. I just wanted to briefly introduce some of our editorial board members and editors who happen to be here. So may I ask Professor Julie Mehta to rise. Professor Siddharth Mallavarapu he's a professor from Shiv Nadar University. They've both been with us right from our inception. Our copy editor, Ms. Hussaina Calcutta-Wala, will rise, thank you. And our wonderful publisher, our wonderful printing persons, Dr. Sudipta Ghosh and Ms. Anjita Ganguly, they're with us. So with these brief few words, I can't sort of leave the stage without one comment on what the summit is. And the summit is based on one big idea. Can India do it? The can-do question has been around forever and has been asked by presidents, scholars, and even housewives and comedians. Let's start with the words of an imperialist president, John F. Kennedy, who erroneously believed himself to be a peacemaker, and many thought he'd have actually ended the war in Vietnam if he'd lived. But in fact, he is the president who ordered the use of Agent Orange in Vietnam that burned the skin off the backs of toiling Vietnamese in the paddy fields. And he's the man who almost took us to the brink of nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And yet, Kennedy is the one who galvanized us with his global call. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. So that's the old can you do it question. I think that's the voice of the toiling Vietnamese. So this is the very question the summit is asking. But we really can't open the summit on the note of an American created nuclear winter, can we? So I quote another American, the comedian Jerry Seinfeld, saying, when you're in comedy, people always come up and say, oh, it must be so hard. It really isn't hard unless you're not good at it. If you can do it, it's really kind of fun and easy. And yes, the government is the comedy department of the military-industrial complex. Think about it. If a comedian is telling us it can be done, we'd better do it, or else we'd be laughed at by a comedian. I end with a few more last words of wisdom from US President Theodore Roosevelt, who tells us, believe you can do it, and you're halfway there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mehta. Now, may I kindly request Ms. Meera Shankar, former Ambassador of India to the United States, to kindly deliver her inaugural address. And a small request to the audience. This entire team of BCCI and Rising Asia Foundation have put in a lot of effort to present this conclave to you and this summit to you today. So, I request to do a little bit of morning exercise and clap a little louder. Thank you.
Good morning. Mr. Abhijit Roy, President of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Mr. Anirudh Leri, former President BCCI and President Rising Asia Foundation, and Dr. Harish Mehta, Founder Chairman, Rising Asia Foundation. I think you've chosen a topic which is very relevant at this particular juncture in our national and international situation. As far as Asia is concerned, it's certainly rising. It's the continent which has 40% of the global 60% of the global population and about 40% of its GDP. If you look at the economies of the Asian countries, then 3 of the 5 biggest global economies are located here: China, Japan, and India. So the locus of economic growth is clearly shifting from the Western Hemisphere, particularly from Europe, which is seeing prolonged sluggish growth, declining populations, and a sense of directionlessness, if I may say so. Where do they go from here? On the other hand, in Asia, you're seeing this optimism that the future is going to be better than the past, and that we will see economic growth shift here, and that eventually China and India can reclaim the position that they historically enjoyed for being responsible for the larger part of global GDP. Throughout history, it was China and India who actually accounted for global trade, global GDP, and so on. That shifted with the Industrial Revolution. Now, within this rising Asia, you also have, unsettled political and geopolitical issues. So it's the continent which has the maximum, or at least a major share of global conflicts. And you have unresolved borders, you have ethnic overlaps, you have the Israel-Palestine issue, which has erupted into conflict in West Asia. You have the nuclear issue in Iran, which has led to conflict with Israel. You have China, Taiwan in the eastern sector, China, Japan in the East China Sea, and you have China's assertive behavior in the South China Sea, where it makes claims to a maritime boundary much beyond what international maritime law would allow, and where it has overlapping claims with a host of ASEAN countries and has had skirmishes with Philippines. So both tremendous opportunity and at the same time geopolitical risks are centered around Asia for the moment. As far as India is concerned, we become a stabilizing factor as a diverse democratic country in a region which has seen prolonged instability, extremism, and also political turbulence. So for India, I think we can become an anchor of stability in this region. Within South Asia itself, and especially for West Bengal, we have seen the turn of events in Bangladesh, then we have seen the turn of events in Nepal, where a restless young generation has opposed or has rebelled against an order which they felt was somehow unfair and unable to provide them the opportunities that they hoped for the future. Now, what are the strengths that India brings to the table in this process of being a stabilizing force in Asia and also being one of the motors of the Asian economy and global economy looking into the future? First, I would say, is the sheer scale of India. 1.4 billion people. If they actually all have better living standards and start consuming, then you will impact every global company. Because what 1.4 million people consume or don't consume, what they actually like or don't like, all that is going to shape global decisions. So one is the sheer scale. Second is that we have a youthful population, with over 50% of our population being below the age of 25 years and 60% of our population being below the age of 30 years. So this is a huge plus, because these young people are going to consume as they go up in life. As they become older, they will have families, they will provide for children, they will want to build homes. In Europe or even in Japan, you see that an older population, a population which is growing older, stops consuming, because they really are not the driving force of an expanding market. Whereas in India, you are going to see this, but this means that we have to give very, very high priority to actually harnessing this demographic dividend, or it can turn into a huge demographic challenge if we are unable to meet the aspirations of these young people for a better quality of life, for more certain employment, for less fragility or precariousness in their livelihoods. Finally, we have a very strong capital of human resources, especially in the services sector. But again, this is an area which is not going to be without challenges, because you're seeing a whole shift in technology being compressed into a very short period of time, which is going to lead to disruptions. So the plus, as I said, is the scale, the young population, and of course the skilled population, and finally the prolonged and steady economic growth that India has experienced since 1991. We have shown resilience in the face of the COVID epidemic. We have bounced back. We have shown resilience in the face of US tariffs. And our growth rate is now estimated for this year anywhere between 7.2 to 7.4%, certainly over 7%. So most credit rating agencies, international agencies, are upping their estimates of India's growth this year and next year. But in 27, they are predicting again a moderation to 6 point something. So big sustained economic growth, though perhaps not at the level that we might like to sustain. Now, these are the plus points. What are the challenges that India faces? Now, I would say the biggest challenge that you face economically is that you have not been able to grow your manufacturing sector. And while services account for 50% of our GDP, manufacturing, the share of manufacturing in our GDP, according to international agencies, is today around 13%. So instead of growing, we wanted to target 25 to 28% of the GDP coming from manufacturing. Instead of actually increasing, it has been decreasing. Now, this is the result of facing global competition and also very serious export competition from China, which has mastered the export value chain, both in low-cost consumer goods as well now today in high-tech goods. So China commands not only the technologies of the future, green energy, electric cars, robotics, artificial intelligence, but they also are not vacating the space of low-cost manufacturing, which they had initially enjoyed, and which, as they move up the value chain, actually makes sense for them to vacate. So today, you see that China's trade surplus just crossed $1 trillion globally. And this means that there are very few companies and manufacturers across the world who can compete with this juggernaut, which is supported by artificially low value yuan, whose value has been kept low for competitiveness, and also by huge state subsidies for exports. So by now, they have become so globally competitive that it's difficult for manufacturers in other countries to compete with them, and therefore you're seeing this huge rise in protectionism across the globe. So the global environment today is not as conducive as, say, at the time that China was rising. Because what you're seeing is a shrinkage in the high tide, or you would say an ebb in the high tide of globalization. America has turned inwards. It is putting high tariffs on all its partners. What began as an effort to balance or rebalance trade with China has turned under President Trump into a trade war with the world. So India is facing the brunt of it. We have 50% tariffs, and while certain goods are outside tariffs, including electronics, including refined petroleum products, including some agricultural goods, a whole host of labor-intensive products which we were exporting to the US, from garments to electricals to phone to other commodities, gems and jewelry, leather, are going to face an impact till we are able to work out a trade agreement with the US. Europe is a potential alternative because the US is our largest trading partner, our largest export market, and we enjoy a small trade surplus in goods with the US of $40 billion. In services, this is in 2024. In services, it is the US which enjoyed a small trade surplus with India. Total two-way trade was in goods and services was around $200 billion. Our aim was to reach $500 billion, but with these tariffs, I think it is going to take longer, and we are not sure, though the trade negotiations are going on, when they are going to be concluded. We've responded to the challenge posed by the US tariffs with a policy which says no confrontation, but no capitulation. So we are not, just bending over across the board, but we are negotiating, and nor have we ramped up the rhetoric against the US, because we know that no other country really, or group of countries, is in a position to substitute the US completely for India. Take China. We export about $14 billion worth of goods only to China, whereas to the US we export over $80 billion worth of goods, and then there are services. China exports, a huge amount to us, with a trade surplus which is reaching almost $100 billion in their favor. Russia, our imports, total two-way trade really, reached $68 billion, but our exports didn't even touch $5 billion. Most of it was the import of energy. Again, with Japan, South Korea, with ASEAN, our trade deficit is in the region of $45 billion. So the US has been the one market where we actually had a trade surplus and were able to be competitive in certain niche sectors, auto components also. So even as we continue to try to reach a trade deal with the US, we have to step up efforts at diversification. Because what this has shown us, it's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call that our traders, our companies need to look at diversified markets to reduce risk. Otherwise, we are too dependent on one market, and any kind of trade action or economic action by that country can cause turbulence in key sectors in India, which provide high levels of employment, even though the impact on the GDP may not be that great, GDP growth, but it will hit employment-intensive sectors. So Europe becomes for us a key possible partner, and we are negotiating a free trade agreement with Europe, which we hope to conclude by the end of this year. I don't know if we will meet the deadline, but the EU commissioners and president are going to be the chief guests at the Republic Day celebrations in Delhi, and the target is to try to complete this before then. With the UK, we have put in place a free trade agreement. We are negotiating with many countries right now, probably with New Zealand. We are on the cusp of almost concluding it. Then we have negotiations going on with countries like Oman, Chile, and so on. So we are expanding the number of free trade agreements which we are negotiating, actually partly in response to the US action. But I think in negotiating these free trade agreements, we have to be conscious of what are our strengths, what are our vulnerabilities, because we shouldn't end up with lopsided or trade agreements which provide lopsided advantage to our other trading partners. Here, of course, this is also requires intense domestic action by India, because you can't treat foreign policy and geopolitics and domestic capability and your domestic strength as two separate entities. They are not compartments which exist in isolation, because your capacity to conduct your foreign policy, your role in global affairs, will be determined actually by how successful you are at growing your economy, at increasing manufacturing, at making manufacturing more globally competitive than it is today, at providing employment to your young, and at trying to become at least leaders in some key sectors of frontier technology, not just being consumers as we have been till today. So huge domestic challenges. The first thing I would say is step up the share of manufacturing in your overall GDP. We are making an effort in the area of high-tech manufacturing, say semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and so on. But we simultaneously need to step up how we can actually grow the employment-intensive sectors, which are low technology. Look at Bangladesh next door in garments, and this actually has been the result of government policy, that we didn't allow our companies to become big. We had small-scale reservations initially, even though we had opened up to the world. And then we had very difficult labor laws, which did not allow the flexibility to operate in an international system where you may get huge orders one year and not get orders the next year. So the inability of the companies to actually respond to that meant that a lot of our, what was initially Indian manufacturing, shifted. And it is countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh who have, or even Sri Lanka, who have been able to pick up the slack from whatever China has vacated. India, not to such an extent. Similarly, leather, similarly, gems and jewelry. Now, these are all labor-intensive industries. And because you have such a large young population, many of whom are not so well educated or so well trained, it is equally important to give focus to growing these sectors. We've just had some labor reforms, but they look at, very marginal scale. You know, it impacts companies which have not too many workers. How do you scale it up to be competitive? You know, for the low-cost sectors, how do you scale up your manufacturing to be competitive? What are the government policies you need to encourage that? And if we don't get that right, in the next 4 or 5 years, I think we would have missed the boat. Because already you have robotics, you have artificial intelligence, you have automation, and even in these employment-intensive sectors, you may find that the quantum of employment has reduced, that indeed the ship to use our major resource, which was manpower, has passed because of very, very, constraining government policy. So it is within the hands of government and within our political elite to have a consensus on this and to try to move this forward. The second, I would say, is to reduce the cost of production. We keep talking of the ease of doing business, but actually there is no economic case for investing in India to produce, because the cost of doing business in India is more than the cost of doing business elsewhere. So you have, the cost of electricity, your industrial tariffs are high, the cost of finance, that is high, though they've reduced interest rates recently. And finally, and this is the most difficult, the availability of land. Because when you need land on that scale, you know, to be able to build workers' dormitories, to have factories on scale, then you need government to step in to create that industrial infrastructure in partnership with industry. Otherwise, if each industry has to look around for a piece of land on which they can set up a factory and negotiate with farmers and so on, it means you've already introduced unpredictability. Third, I would say, is increase R&D by technical companies, because we don't spend enough on R&D. We just basically buy technology from outside. It's less than 1% that our companies are spending on R&D. So then we are dependent on technology from outside. And finally, I would say skilling up our population. These are the steps that we need to take to actually be able to take advantage. In the international field, I think we have an opportunity, again, because of Western efforts to de-risk from China, but Trump is giving the go to the China plus one policy. He doesn't want to offend China. And he is making China the major focus of his efforts to stabilize the relationship. Europe certainly is seeking a China plus one strategy. The US may still come back to it to build some kind of resilient supply chains, because it's one of the major objectives of the Quad. So for India, I think developing relations with middle powers in Asia becomes very important. China is still a challenger to you. They pose an economic challenge, they pose a geostrategic challenge on the border, and they have used their monopoly over key resources to constrain you, for instance, rare earth magnets. So build relations with the middle powers who face a similar situation. Japan, Australia, Indonesia, South Korea, Vietnam. These are countries in Asia which have good economic growth, which have good technologies, and who could be more reliable partners in terms of creating a stable Asian balance in future. Look at developing countries and areas where you are not present. As was mentioned earlier, Africa, Latin America, these would be areas where, or Southeast Asia, a little more, where you could look to build broader trade and economic relations in future. Then, as far as foreign policy is concerned, ensuring access to critical resources should now be a key driving factor for Indian foreign policy. It's not just, military and hard defense hardware, but it is your strategic comprehensive power, which would include your economic and technological capacities and your ability to ease restraints of resources. So looking at Central Asia, looking at African countries or Latin American countries which have these resources, working out the agreements, so because many of these countries also seek diversification from China. Finally, I would say working with countries which have technological capabilities, whether it is the US, whether it is Europe, whether it is Russia, balancing our relationship with the great powers to enhance our strategic autonomy and freedom of choice. If we are able to get our act together in these next 5 to 10 years, I think India is going to be one of the key drivers of the global economy in future and will be able to reclaim its historical place where it used to be responsible for 25 to 28% of global GDP in the 17th century. So the 21st century will not only belong to Asia, but India will be a key partner in Asia's success. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, audience. That's loud enough and deservingly so. May I quickly move on to Dr. Sanjay Baru, who's been waiting. He's with us virtually. Dr. Baru is a political commentator and ex-chief editor, The Financial Express. He was supposed to come. His tickets were done, but as I mentioned, due to this ongoing crisis, he has to do it virtually, and it's a last moment development, so we could not inform you earlier. However, the man is same, but only not physically here. So we look forward to his insightful address now. Thank you.
Thank you. Am I audible? Right, I'm assuming I'm audible. Well, first of all, my apologies for not being there in person. I had some other commitment here and I didn't want to risk getting stuck in Kolkata because of the airline problem. But I'm grateful to Bengal Chamber of Commerce and to Rising India Foundation for inviting me to speak this morning. Well, Meera has done the job for me. In her lengthy talk, she has covered both diplomatic as well as economic issues that require to be addressed for us to make this India's turn. I actually agree with almost everything she has said, so I'm not going to take your time, and we are already running behind time, the schedule. So let me be a little more telegraphic than her. First of all, I agree with everything she has said, and both in terms of the nature of the challenge we face and the nature of the task at hand. Let me begin with a story or an anecdote. In 1999, when after India tested nuclear and we became a nuclear power, Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee set up a National Security Advisory Board. It had in it retired diplomats, retired military heads, scientists, economists, etc. And the question posed to the National Security Advisory Board was that now that we are a nuclear power and we are a rising economy, don't forget, already in the 90s, thanks to the initiative taken by Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh in 1991, India was already a rising economy. But China was ahead of us, East Asia was ahead of us. So the question posed to us in the year 1999 is, how does India join this race? How does India become a part of rising Asia? If you recall, it was already recognized that Asia was rising. The East Asian economies were all tiger economies. They were all doing very well. But for us, the question was, how do we become part of the rising Asia story? And after deliberating on this question, I was asked to prepare the note for the NSAB. I was a member of the NSAB. I went around the government of India, all the secretaries to finance, commerce, industry, agriculture, etc., spoke to all of them and finally landed up in the office of the then Foreign Secretary, K.V. Raghunath. And Mr. Raghunath's reply to me, I keep remembering it all the time. He said, Mr. Baru, now that you have spoken to all the heads of the economic ministries, let me tell you, if they do their job, I will have no work to do. Because India's place in the world will depend on how the Indian economy performs. We perform well at home if the growth rate of the Indian economy is pushed up, if India becomes more globally competitive, more open to international trade and investment, then really there is very little work for diplomats to do. And I think the challenge even today is very similar from whatever Ms. Shankar has said in the last 30 minutes or so. That's really the sum and substance. that if we get our act together, if we get our act together on increasing share of manufacturing, making manufacturing more globally competitive, on investing in R&D, on investing in, increasing the investments in education, and so on and so forth, on being able to realize the so-called demographic dividend. There are so many ifs about what we need to do at home. If we do all this, we will be part of the Rising Asia story. So 25 years after the NSAB report was presented, we are in a very similar situation even today, that the challenge is at home. And I think this is my key message, that the world was difficult even in 1999. Don't forget, we were subject to sanctions, both by the United States and by Japan, our two important economic partners at that time. Our share of world trade was still not very much. We were not attracting adequate foreign investment. It was not a particularly friendly world that we were dealing with in 99. But we did test nuclear. We did open up our economy. We undertook policy changes in order to be able to join this story of a rising Asia. And I think we have, to a large extent, walked that path, but we have still somewhere to go. And let me explain that point. If you look at the average rate of growth of the economy from 2000 till now, last 25 years, the average rate of growth is around 6.5%. Some in the early years, particularly from 2003 to 2009, the last year of the Vajpayee government and the first term of the Manmohan Singh government, our economy actually grew at over 8% per annum. But then it has slowed down after that. But the average rate of growth for the last 25 years is 6.5%. If we want India to become a developed economy by 2047, Viksit Bharat, as the Prime Minister keeps repeating, from 2025 to 2047, the Indian economy has to grow at an average annual rate of 8%. The challenge, therefore, for us on the economic side is to go from an average of 6.5% per annum over the quarter century to an average of 8% over the next 2 decades. As any economist would tell you, this is not an easy challenge. To be able to push the average annual percentage rate of growth by 1.5 percentage points, it requires effort. It requires effort on the industrial front, as Ms. Shankar has mentioned, increasing share of manufacturing. It requires effort on the educational front. It requires effort in agriculture. It requires effort on infrastructure. It requires across the board effort. Therefore, I think, world who look at India's place in the world, talk about aspiring to be a fourth largest economy, a major power, rising power, etc., should keep this in mind, that to be able to, meet those aspirations, the job is still at home. We talk about China as a competitor. And, the standard argument over the last 40 years is, oh, China is a dictatorship, or China does subsidies, China does tricks, China undervalues currency. All these are ruses today. The fact is that over the last 2 decades, China has emerged as a knowledge economy. I remember Dr. Manmohan Singh talking about this in the early 2000s. How do we build India as a knowledge economy? Today, when we are talking about artificial intelligence and new technologies, ultimately, we will be tested on the basis of our capacity as a knowledge economy. Knowledge economy, not just in the high-tech areas, but knowledge across. Knowledge economy in agriculture, improving productivity of Indian agriculture. We lag behind all of Asia as far as productivity in rice, productivity in wheat, productivity in various other commodities is concerned. In each of these areas, we have to become a knowledge economy. This requires investment in human capital, in education. That is what China did over the last half a century, of becoming a knowledge-based economy across the board. we are still not anywhere significant on that journey. And unless we focus on these critical challenges, simply blaming China for knocking off our markets or for stunting our industrial development, I don't think it's enough. So I would, the first point I would make is, what is the trajectory? What does the current government intend to do to raise the rate of growth on an average, annual average, medium-term rate of growth from 6.5 to 8%? Quarterly rates of growth mean nothing. We are always focused on quarterly rates of growth. It is irrelevant what quarterly rates of growth are. Look at average annual rates of growth. There was a time we had 5-year plans. We used to look at 5-yearly rates of growth. In terms of 5-yearly rates of growth, over the last 25 years, we have grown at 6.5. We need to step up. And the second point I would make is that, since this is the Rising Asia Foundation organizing this conversation, the rise of Asia is being challenged. I think we should not fool ourselves into believing that somehow we can have a better relationship with the West in order to deal with the challenge of China. It is not simply the rise of China that is being challenged. The rise of Asia is being challenged. What we see as a deliberate attempt by President Donald Trump to first, what should I say, to use the American phrase, circle the wagons, is essentially circling the wagons in the northern hemisphere, in the western hemisphere. His actions in Latin America, etc., and his actions vis-a-vis Canada, Mexico. Mexico, incidentally, followed suit yesterday by raising tariffs 50%. Why did they do that? They did that because they are now part of the American enterprise, and they cannot have an equation with India independent of the equation that Donald Trump has with India. So there is a circling of wagons in the West. And this circling of wagons in the West is aimed at challenging the rising Asia narrative. I think it's time for us in Asia to sit back and ask the question, has the rise of Asia become a challenge to the West? And if it has become a challenge to the West, and essentially it's become a challenge to the West because of China, much less because of India, but India too is rising, if not at 8%, certainly at 6.5%. And would pose a challenge to the West. The West is not going to make it easier. You look at, for example, World Trade System. The WTO has been made redundant. We talk about multilateralism. There is no multilateralism in trade. So we have also reconciled ourselves. We have reconciled ourselves to plurilateral regional trading arrangements and hope to somehow maintain, or if not increase, our share of world trade through various free trade agreements, regional trade agreements. Though we are not yet ready to open up to something like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership or the TCE PPP in the Asia. These are difficult decisions we have to take. But the fact is, India is rising, Asia has been rising, and this narrative is being challenged. So those of you who are scholars in international relations, etc., I think it's time to question the narrative. As Ms. Shankar mentioned, yes, a narrative began at the turn of the century when a Cambridge or Oxford historian, Angus Maddison, wrote this famous study of the world economy over the last millennium, saying that till the 1700, India and China were the dominant economies. And after 1700, thanks to European colonialism and imperialism, the share of Europe increased. Subsequently, the share of the United States increased. The share of India and China collapsed. And that after 1950, China and India are recovering their space. And therefore, as we go forward into the 21st century, we are going to be seeing the rise of Asia. That was the narrative. And I submit to you that today that narrative is being challenged. It is being challenged by the West. We can say that Europe is slowed down, Europe is in trouble. Yes, of course, Europe has slowed down in trouble, but Europe is desperately seeking, once again, the comfort of alliance with the United States. It is the United States that has raised the stakes, the price that Europe has to pay to be part of the Western alliance, and Europe is being told, pay that price, then we are still part of the alliance. But at some point, they will pay the price. Already, they've paid the price in terms of investments they've agreed to make in the United States. But make no mistake, we are at an inflection point in human history where what we saw over the last half century, which is the rise of Asia, of which we wanted to be a part, over the last quarter century, increasingly a part of. Today, that is being challenged by the West. And we have to re examine our relationships, our strategic partnerships, who are our friends, who will work with us to make us competitive. But ultimately, whatever growth we experience will have to be based on our own domestic capabilities. Look inwards. Our task is at home. This was the message of the National Security Advisory Board report in the year 2000. And incidentally, the convener of that board at that time was Mr. K. Subramaniam, the father of Jaishankar, right? And that board had very distinguished gentlemen like J.N. Dikshit, who later became National Security Advisor, N.N. Vora, who was Prime Minister's secretary, and so on and so forth. So the received wisdom of that board was that unless we become a more globally competitive economy, which means the work is at home. It's not enough to say ease of business, ease of living. The fact is that Indian industries today is not globally competitive. Your biggest billionaires are making their money on the domestic economy, not by exporting to the international economy, except in petroleum. And thanks to the investment the Ambanis have made. But otherwise, by and large, Indian industry is not competitive, globally competitive. And unless we address that issue, and that requires scaling up manufacturing capabilities, that requires building a knowledge economy, that requires skilling the labor force. The task is at home, gentlemen. And unless we address that task, I'm afraid it's all a lot of empty talk to talk about Viksit Bharat and rising India and etc. etc. Thank you very much for this opportunity. But I think it's good to have a narrative fixation at the very beginning of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. With this, we come to the conclusion of our inaugural session. However, we have a pleasant task to perform, and that is to give away a token of our appreciation to Ms. Meera Shankar. So, if I may request our President, Mr. Vijit Roy, Mr. Anil Dulahiri, and Dr. Harish Mehta to kindly jointly hand over the token of our appreciations. We have a memento to give her, and a couple of mementos, and a book by the Rising Asia Foundation to present to her. Okay. Dr. Baru, we shall send across your mementos at your residence by courier.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And can we have a group picture, please? Okay. Group picture, please. Yeah, you can just come in the front.